What is going on to all my Atlanta fans out there, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are here to discuss this fourth season, episode 8, which was titled The Goof Who Sat by the Door. It's one of my better goofy laughs there. We're going to leave that to a little bit later in the breakdown. And oh yeah, it's going to be one of those breakdowns. We're about to get goofy as hell. And listen, your boy went down this rabbit hole after watching this episode, and I didn't think I was going to find my way out. But here we are breaking it down. I'm so excited to be back with you all. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell. That way you can stay up to date with all my Atlanta content. You can also give your boy a follow on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. All those links can be found in the description of this very video. Well, speaking of this video, do your boy a favor. If you enjoyed today's review, hit that thumbs up button, y'all. It helps out the channel a lot, and I appreciate the support. Also, hit that share button. If you know someone that loves this show and loves talking about the show as much as we do, hit that share button. I would really appreciate it. But more importantly, I want to talk to you. I make these videos to interact with you, so let's talk about it in the comments. Let's put it out there. Is this not only one of the best episodes this season, but maybe of all time? Let's talk about it in the comments. But going into this episode, let's talk pros, let's talk cons. If you've never seen a Goofy movie, did you watch it after watching this episode? Or like me, I haven't seen it in a while, but after I watched this, I watched a Goofy movie. We'll talk about that later. Let's talk about that again. Deeper meanings. What did you take away from this episode? Let's have a conversation in the comments. So everyone knows, if you don't, I leave time codes for all these videos, so you can skip ahead to the breakdown. But for all my real ones, I want to address a couple things up top. Number one, every single Sunday, we go live here on this channel having a deeper discussion about the latest episode of Atlanta, and we'll be going live again this Sunday, 12 p.m. Central Time. And I've already had the homies hit me up and say, E, count me in for Sunday. We got a lot to discuss, so I hope to see you all there. I'm going to leave that link to that stream in the description of this video. Number two, it broke my heart that I wasn't able to give you all my review immediately after the episode premiere, which I have done since the beginning of season 3. I love consistency. I love interacting with you all, so I wasn't able to do so. But if you're subscribed to the channel, I'm going to put it on the screen now. I'll put out a post on the community tab letting you all know why the episode wasn't going to be ready immediately after it premiered. And I'm saying all that to say this. I would assume that they're going to probably do the same thing for the critics and the press. We're probably not going to get the episode to the day of, so episode 9 and 10, expect them to be, my reviews to be maybe a day or two a little bit late, because as I said in that post, I like to rewatch these episodes. I like to dive deep into these episodes. So with that being said, just keep an eye out for that moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, let's just get right into this breakdown. I'm going to start off with just my initial thoughts. Number one, can I just put this in the ether? This was probably the best made up fake documentary I've ever seen in my life, man. Kudos to the stock photos, the video footage they shot, the recreating of the 90s, the cameos that we'll talk about here in this review, and also shout out to the writing and the direction by Donald Glover, who has a lot of personal connections to this episode that we'll break down. And also, I want to point out the acting. I don't want to forget them, and the family members, all the executives in this episode. Thomas, his son, Maxwell, who was played by Maurice P. Harry, and Thomas Washington himself, played beautifully by Eric Berryman. Incredible, incredible performance, gentlemen. Really great job. And again, the direction was impeccable. Oh my goodness, I just got to say this again to the production side of it. If you didn't know well, you would have thought this was a true story, right? I mean, again, I just can't believe how real and crazy the production was. And then last but not least, I have been talking about it for the last few weeks, especially in our live streams. We got to continue this legacy of Atlanta. Please don't let this be the last that we're going to see these characters and of the show and these writers. So I propose this pitch to you, Donald Glover. If this video somehow comes up on your timeline or in your DM, shout out to Donald Glover. Listen, man. I know you got your thing with Hollywood. You got music. You got your family. You're living your life. Blessings to you and everyone a part of the show. But I need a spinoff, Donald Glover and the creators of the show. And here's my pitch. Let's do a spinoff of nothing but band episodes. BAN, Black America's Network. And let's just have these little standalone, make-believe, real fake stories. Can we do that? Can we just have a special spinoff with those band episodes? You heard it here first. Shout out to Donald Glover if it does come true. And then last but not least, as I kind of alluded to, I couldn't have been the only one that after watching this episode immediately, and I mean literally, as you can see on the screen now, here's a screenshot of me watching the damn movie, a Goofy movie. I had to watch it. And as an adult, I appreciate it more, especially after watching this episode. And yeah, Goofy and Max were definitely black. Let's just go ahead and put that out there. Let's move on and get into the breakdown. Y'all ready? Full spoilers ahead as we open the episode with the BAN logo, Black America Network, which by the way was first introduced to us back in season 1 of episode 7, which that episode was titled BAN. And if you all remember my video from episode 5, I had pointed out that there was an Easter egg with the BAN in that episode when we saw Crank That Killer on the YouTube channel. You can see a little Easter egg there. So I love the callbacks to the original season. So as we get into it, I love how they put the disclaimer on the screen, letting us know that there will be some factual things in the story and some made-believe things. And I love the balance. There were real life people from Disney in this episode. There was posters of Aladdin and the Little Mermaid, and obviously there were some fictional things too. But I love the little disclaimer because that just let me know, oh, we're about to get into something very special as we get more into getting into a brief history and a rundown of Disney in the 90s as they talk about the hits such as Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, which saved them from being bankrupt, which again is a real life situation as we get into the real world, which in the early 90s, everything outside of Hollywood wasn't a fairy tale as they talk about 1992, Rodney King's beaten, as they mentioned that during this riot that was going on, there was something big going on at the same time, and that is that Disney has hired this first black movie and TV head, aka Thomas Washington, who, man, I gotta get a shirt of this photo that y'all can see on the screen now. I want to get that on a shirt. I'm gonna rock it, man, because Thomas Washington, he was a real one, y'all. As we'll get into here in a bit. But I couldn't help but to think of how I talked about in previous reviews that this particular season, in season 3, it was written 2018, 2019, and particularly in 2020, and I couldn't just help but to realize and recognize the parallels and the mirroring of George Floyd and what that did to the culture and the parallels of what happened during that time in 2020 and what happened in 1992. So there's a lot of parallels that I caught from this episode, that being one of them. But also, let's take a look at this title, y'all. Again, the title of this episode was called The Goof Who Sat by the Door, and I had to look it up, and lo and behold, there was an actual film that was made in 1978. It was a crime drama by the name of The Spook Who Sat by the Door. Now, this was based on the novel and became a movie, and it was a satire of the civil rights struggle in the United States of late 1960s in the serious attempt to focus on the issue of black nationalism. Now, the title of the novel, The Spook Who Sat by the Door, refers to the public relations practice in the early days of the racial affirmative action in the U.S. society, whereby the first black person hired by a company would be placed in an office that was close to or in a visible place of the entrance of the building, so that everyone who entered the building would see that the company had a racially mixed staff of employees. Now, does that sound a little bit familiar to this episode? Having a person of color, sitting in the front of the businesses and having Thomas Washington as the CEO. Hey, we got affirmative action over here at Disney. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I love the connections of that title there. I might be having a bit of a stretch, but I think that it's not a coincidence that this title kind of reminisces the name of that novel and that movie I just talked about. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comment section as we move on. Meeting Thomas Washington, as we get the introduction of Thomas and his story, as we find out his mom and dad named him after the singer Tom Jones. Now, I thought it was very interesting that they chose to go with Tom Jones. Now, obviously, the mom said that they chose that name because his father was courting his mom, and it was like a big Tom Jones song during that time. But let's dive a little bit deeper. Now, Tom Jones, who has some bangers, we all know, is not unusual to have love, the Carlton dance and all that stuff, but from Wells, right? And I found this article very interesting, as you can see on the screen now. Back in 2015, he wanted to get a DNA test to see if he had some black ancestors, and because he was always told, and you guys can see different images I'm going to put on the screen now with Tom Jones, he was told that he was passing as being white, right? So I just kind of, let's parallel these stories. Donald Glover doesn't just do things on accident. Having Tom Jones being brought in here, I think that he probably saw that article of him pretending to be kind of passing as, or not pretending, but people saying that he's passing as white, and knowing the character, Tom Washington was told that he was white even though he was black. So I think there might be some connection on why they chose Tom Jones as the person that they based their son off of. So might be of a stretch, but I don't know. Let me know your thoughts if you all made those connections, if you knew about that 2015 article that I brought up. But let's get back into the breakdown here as we learn that Thomas was obsessed with drawing, and he was a huge fan of Astro Boy, who, another little interesting fact about this character, he was actually the first full-length anime film, and it was a robot. It was based on a robot and his ideals and him wanting to be a human, and he couldn't achieve those goals. And again, tying back to Thomas, he wanted to achieve goals that he just couldn't reach, as we'll talk about a little bit later in the episode, at least to when he was on Earth. And obviously the film came out and he actually made a bit of a reach, again, fictionalizing the story. But I thought it was interesting that, again, there's an accident that they chose Astro Boy as someone he looked up to. As we see within this young age of Thomas, he was so smart and he saw the world for what it really was, as they talk about how it was just so unfair. As we hear his cousins and his mom talking about how he was picked on for being called white, and also, you know, him being into drawing, him being into anime. I know we can all, I'm talking about all nerds out there, which the word nerd is a little bit more acceptable than when some of my older friends grew up, and especially, people back in the day, like a Thomas Washington. Of course, you were being picked on because you were into nerdy things, anime, comics, things of that nature. But again, like I said, in today's society, it's more acceptable. So I love kind of that personal connection, because when I was growing up, it was starting to become more acceptable. Dragon Ball Z and, Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! And all that different stuff there. So I love the personal connection. But speaking of personal connection, again, I went down this rabbit hole and I couldn't get out. I had to pull myself out a couple times, but I have to make these connections with Donald Glover himself. And I got a lot of examples that I'm going to share with you all here. I don't think it's not a coincidence that I think Donald Glover, to me, was describing how he ended up making Atlanta and what it took for him to get to that point of his career. I don't think it's coincidence that he decided to direct this very episode. I got some examples for you all. Bear with me for a second. Number one, if you listen to Donald Glover's music as Childish Gambino, he mentions a lot of times, especially in his earlier work, how he grew up being made fun of and acting like he's white. Number two, Donald came out of college and was recruited by Tina Fey as a writer for 30 Rock through a diversity program. We'll talk about it later, but there was a similar program that Thomas Washington found himself in. Let's move on to some other examples. As I have here, Donald Glover himself assembled an all-black writers' room for Atlanta to create a more authentic black show. Didn't Thomas Washington do a very similar thing? I digress. As we move on to my next point, Donald's pitch to Atlanta when they originally sold this to FX, the idea of the show was much different than what he pitched it as, and also it's much more deeper and much more bolder than what the execs at FX thought it was originally going to be. Thomas Washington, I'm just going to make a kid's movie that has a lot more layers and personal connections than initially thought. As I move on, Donald was told by those same executives what characters should do and not do, and Donald hired Paul Sims, an executive producer, as a white delegate to convince the executives that, we're doing things and whatnot. But last but not least, you can't forget Donald Glover himself has worked with Disney in the past with projects like Lion King, the Solo movie, and may I remind you that Hulu is, owned by Disney itself. So, need I say more of the personal connections that Donald Glover has to the story? Is absolutely genius. So getting back into the episode, and in particularly Thomas Washington college years, he attended Savannah College of Art and Design. And as they talk about him and his connections to the real life animator Art Babbitt, who was a huge influence on Thomas's life, Thomas was obsessed with this particular article by the name of Analysis of a Goof, which was a real life article that was published in the Sight and Sound in 1974, as you all can see on the screen now. As we see Thomas's old professor reading the article and Babbitt describing Goofy as a character. Now, he's quoted as saying, "Goofy is gullible, a good Samaritan, a half-wit, and shiftless, good natured colored boy and a hick. Now, I think it's pretty obvious at this point in this episode that they're saying that Goofy was pretty much modeled after a black man, which we can 100% agree with that, right? I think it's pretty obvious at this point in the episode, and I love that. I love that because me growing up, I'm like, man, Goofy definitely seems a lot different than his other, Mickey Mouse and all the other Disney characters. So I just love how this episode just shines a light on that. As we get back into the episode here, Thomas ended up creating Goofy Please as an illustration of Black Goofy, who was hooping, who was at the barbershop and just making those personal connections. And we got to talk about it, y'all. Let me know in the comments. When you grew up or as you're growing up, what do you think about Goofy? Do you think he's black? Let's talk about that in the comment section below. But again, man, I love how this episode kind of draws on real life. Like I personally connect, especially this show alone. When you look at things through a different lens, or even pop culture movies growing up as a kid, when you see it as a kid, you only see it as just that, right? Or some kids are very intellectual and thinks about things a little bit more deeper, but for the most cases, we just see things for what they are. But when you go back at an older age and you live life and you have this new lens at looking at certain media, especially Disney movies, there's been so many articles and so many things and so many more mature things that should not be in kids' movies that Disney puts in the movies. So I love how they just shine a light on that, and it's just perspective on things. This episode just hit on so many levels. But let's get back to Thomas here, who Thomas in 1990 made The Little Prince for his school project. As they say, it was believed that this was created because Thomas lost his father, who, again, going back to my connection with Donald Glover, he actually lost his father back in 2018, as you all can see on the screen now. And Little Prince is actually based on a true famous story. Now, this story follows a young prince who visits various different planets in space, including Earth, and addresses themes such as loneliness, friendship, loss, and, love. So again, I don't think it's a coincidence that Thomas Washington pulled some of his real life, again, based on the character losing his father, and inspired him to make this story that has very similar themes to what he's going through at that time in his life. Again, y'all, the writing in this episode, the kind of the foreshadowing, the connections, the realism is just next level. Now, this is what put Thomas over the moon, and as we see this project put his foot in the door of Disney, which I want to go to another important connection here to a Disney employee, and I'm referring to the connections of Floyd Norman, who was the first black artist to work for Walt Disney. Now, in 1957, Norman was employed as an in-betweener. Y'all remember the guy in this episode who was also an in-betweener, who we'll talk a little bit about later, but he was a in-betweener for Sleeping Beauty, which was released in 1959, and at that point, Walt Disney decided to hire him for a long time basis. Now, Norman also contributed not only in projects like The Sleeping Beauty, but also 101 Dalmatians and The Jungle Book. So I'm pretty sure we can look at Thomas Washington and kind of compare him to other black men, other black CEOs within the film industry, within business and all that different stuff. But I think it's safe to assume that we can make some parallels between Thomas Washington and Floyd Norman. Let me know your thoughts on all that. But let's pivot over to Thomas Washington and his earlier days at working with Disney. Now, as I mentioned, the realism in this episode, shout out to the real life journalist Jenna Werther in this episode, as they go on to talk about how Disney created a diversity program. Remember, I talked about how Donald Glover himself found himself in a diversity program when he was trying to work with Tina Fey in his NBC days. So again, the parallels are crazy, y'all. But seriously, having a bigger conversation, which we'll have on Sunday's live stream, the topic at hand about Disney and checking off a box in a diversity quota, right? And listen, to be fair, it's not just Disney, but obviously they're one of the biggest companies in the Hollywood landscape, but it's also Hollywood in general. Again, agendas, checking off a box, diversity programs, forcing certain things. So again, I thought that the real life circumstances and the real life situation that we see in Hollywood made its way into this episode, which again just makes this episode just hit on another level. But as Thomas gets his first gig, he's working on 1990s DuckTales the movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamps, and things aren't really picking up for Thomas until we get the uprising of the riots that were going on during 1992. As Thomas, he wanted to get on the streets. He wanted to be a part of the rioting, but his mom said, listen, boy, put all that anger, put all that aggression on that pencil and on that paper. And he ended up saying, listen, if I ever get a chance to write a movie, I ain't gonna hold back, and my man does not hold back, and I can't wait to get to that portion there. But I wanted to take a little tour here, pull off on the side here, and give you all a couple of again, I went down this rabbit hole. There was a couple things I found online as far as what else was going on as far as Hollywood during the 1992 riots with Rodney King. One of them, for example, was the Bill Cosby. He had his final episode of The Cosby Show, which aired during the second night of the riots, and Bill came out on stage and told the people, listen, stay at home and eat your pudding. I'm just joking, but he says stay at home. So I thought that was just kind of interesting that the last episode of The Cosby Show was going on during that time. But this one here hit me on another level. Again, I went down this rabbit hole. One of my favorite action films of all time is Terminator 2 T2 Judgment Day. And as you all can see on the screen now, there was an audio commentary by the director, James Cameron, who said not only was the biker bar scene filmed across the street from the LAPD officers that beat up Rodney King, but they also were filming on the same night that it happened. Man, that's some crazy stuff, y'all. Again, just little fun facts for you all. Let me know if there's any other fun facts that you all know about that, but share that in the comments. But this is the moment that everything changed, as we see some important soups within the Disney boards had passed away, which meant there was an open spot available, and the board mistakenly picked Thomas and Thomason, I think was the mix-up, and Thomas Washington ended up becoming the CEO. Now, I couldn't remember it, man. I was like, is it Trading Places? But no, Trading Places with Eddie Murphy he made a bet with Dan, and that wasn't there. But there has to be a movie that has a similar premise that they end up picking the wrong person to be CEO. I could be making that up, but let me know if there was any connection that you all thought about. But I thought that was just hilarious at how they end up picking Thomas as the new CEO. Very, very funny. And speaking of funny, the pictures and again the stock photos they had of him shaking the hands of the white man and the video of him dying laughing. This episode, which we'll get into the funny parts, was hilarious, y'all. But it was at this moment that we get this little interview with one of the animators who talks about how Thomas pointed out how one of the important questions was, and this is a very important question, y'all, why is it that Goofy was allowing Mickey Mouse to treat Pluto, a dog, who we know Goofy is a dog? Why was he allowing him to treat him like that? That's a question we've all been asking. And also the deeper question is, why would you see Goofy walking Pluto, a dog walking a dog? Some really thought-provoking stuff there, y'all. Let's talk about that in the comments section. But we now get into fantastic elements of this episode. That is the birth of a Goofy movie, ladies and gentlemen. As we get into it, we meet Frank Rose, who, like I mentioned earlier, was an in-betweener for many, many years, but Thomas gave him a promotion of a lifetime. He wanted him to be the lead director of the blackest film of all time. As we get into this film here being about black fatherhood, low income, segregation, fear of going to jail, single parenting, and of course, cheese being within the black community and the diets. Now let's correlate those things that I just mentioned to a Goofy movie, which, like I said, I rewatched after watching this episode. So a couple different examples, and also too, this is where Thomas said, I got the perfect character that we can do all this with, and it becomes, again, the birth of a Goofy movie. But going back to those topics that you can find in this film, again, just a couple of them. There's so many other things that you can tie into. But for example, Goofy being a single father. Remember how when Goofy gets a call from the principal, and the principal's on the phone like, your son's dressing like one of those gang members, and if you don't keep an eye on him, he's gonna...
I'd seriously reevaluate the way you're raising your child before he ends
He's gonna end up in the electric chair. Again, the fear of going to jail as a black man. I loved it. And then also, too, they talked about the cheese and black people's diet. Bobby, who was voiced by Pauly Shore, eating the cheese. I love that call back there. And again, y'all, don't even get me started on the deep connections between Max in that movie and being a nerd, and obviously Powerline and the Bobby Brown connections come through Donald Glover on this episode. But I also love how this episode goes into how Thomas viewed these characters and the connection that he pulled from. And it makes me think of Atlanta and myself, how I talked about it earlier, but when you see things from a different lens, and when you get older and you start to appreciate things more and you want to do more and be a part of the conversation, there's so many personal connections that I have with this episode that just made me love it so much. But we get more into Thomas's family as we meet his wife, and we meet Maxwell, who as I remind you, Max is Goofy's son in the film. A lot of correlations there, obviously. But again, shout out to the stock video and all of the events and looking so real and recreating the 90s was just spot on, perfect. The Goofy movie, made for Max, as Thomas would say, if I'm not here, show him this film. As they dive into black men being portrayed in media during that time, as they show one of my personal favorite skit shows of all time, In Living Color, and they show this segment with men on films, and we see them talking about how men were shown in this kind of queer light, but then kind of mirror that to someone like Nino Brown in New Jack City. Again, man, I love this episode, but then they tie that into how Thomas Washington wanted to create a black man who puts his family first and loves you and doesn't care who you are, as we actually get to meet Maxwell as an adult. And again, shout out to that amazing actor, as we see him starting to talk about how his father was attempting to do something with his films, such as tackling subjects such as black exceptionalism. Some people believe performance is a way to get by, but there's limits put on us by outsiders. So again, y'all, going back to when Maxwell was a kid, maybe not being able to understand what his father was trying to do, to when he's an adult and can see things in a much different lens based on his experience as a black man in America as he grows up as an adult. As they go into the trip Goofy takes Max on and connects it to the Green Book, and this is where the executives at Disney start to see, man, there's a lot more deeper meanings to this film, y'all, as we transition over to the animator meeting in 1994. Bro, this moment was so damn funny, as we see Thomas talking to his animators about never truly drawing black authentic characters. May I remind you about my Donald Glover connection, hiring all black creators to bring that authenticity into Atlanta, as we see this white man walking on crutches because he researched and went to learn about black people, and Tom must have said the wrong thing because he got his ass beat, y'all. Put it in the comments now. What did Tom say at that family barbecue? Did he say, Goofy, please? Did he say something about the food? What did Thomas say? Let me know in the comments below. But this is where we start to see the complaints are starting to come in about Thomas and his methods. One being not putting white ass Mickey in his whole movie. Again, this is to me where the episode was just hitting on the comic beats, and I was just laughing my ass off, y'all. But Thomas wasn't here for a long time. He was here for a good time. Remember what he said in 1992. If they ever let me make a movie, I'm going to let them hear me out. And he kept that promise again with the clips, as we see Thomas dabbing up all the black men, and one in particular as he passes the other white animators. It remind me of that Key and Peele skit when they were impersonating Barack Obama. I just love this show, man. But we see Thomas is starting to show him the proper dance movements and how to properly dab someone with the snap, y'all. That's important. That's important. Remember that, y'all. As we get one of the animators recalling a time when he had enough with Thomas's methods, as he was sipping on whiskey with his famous Hollywood friends. For example, Janet Jackson, Sinbad, Eddie Murphy, and Thomas questioned, who ordered the white rice? Hilarious, perfect line. Put that on a t-shirt. But tying it back into real life, I've never been in a Hollywood executive room or in a meeting or in a board meeting, but I would imagine the kind of realism within that scene is when you have like a, stereotypical white older executive and an assistant of color or a black animator or a black screenwriter or anyone of color comes in, they would make that type of joke, like who let the women in here, who let the dogs in, kind of that's racial undertone. So that's where I kind of correlated that particular line there. But can we talk? Let's talk about these cameos, y'all, as we get the legends making cameos. I'm talking Brian McKnight, the one and only Sinbad, who, if I'm not mistaken, this is his first TV appearance since he had a stroke in 2020, and the man hasn't missed a beat. Sinbad was hitting those comedic timings perfectly. Man, I was loving those legends, I tell y'all. But Brian gives Thomas the idea to bring in another GOAT, and I'm talking about Evan Campbell. Can we talk? Which we know was voiced as Power Line in the film. We see you don't want to challenge Thomas's blackness blackness. He's getting more into his roots, and we see him, remember, as a kid, he was picked on for being, you know, into drawing, into anime, but now the tables have turned and he's trying to make it cool, man. He's trying to make being part of the nerdism, being, you know, into anime, being into drawing is a cool thing, man. And we see Thomas even brought a gun to work, and that's where unfortunately things kind of went south for him as Thomas became mean, and this is where his wife leaves him. And you'll notice as the episode goes further along, Thomas is looking more and more like Goofy, y'all, and the connections that we'll talk about with the gloves and the shoes a little bit later. But the executives are bringing up the budget of the film, which is getting out of control, and Thomas told them that everything is fine. And the moment here when we have the guy talking about, he told them everything is fine, then he had this very chilling, broken laugh, and that laugh is we're going to be doing that on Sunday. I want to see my guests if they can do the Goofy laugh. But that moment was very chilling. That's where the little scary, you know, Atlanta-isms come in. But time to get the CEO out of here as we see my man on the table with the peace sign, which killed me. We see that they wanted to buy out Thomas for $75 million over 10 years, but he didn't take it. As Thomas started to get paranoid, he's bringing in Muslim security guards. He's adding in gang members to his roster to get that protection. As we learn that the original ending of the film that Thomas had planned was to have Goofy and Max being killed by the police officers, which if you all are fans of cinema, and particularly 2017's Jordan Peele's Get Out, if you all don't know, there was supposed to be an alternate ending for that film, which I believe is on the Blu-ray, deleted scenes. Our boy, played by Daniel Kaluuya, he was supposed to get killed by the police. So I think that that would have been a much darker ending than what we got in the Goofy film, which we know ended in a concert, which wasn't the initial plan. But was it an accident? Is the questions brought to the table. Is he still out there? And this is where we get the footage of the tape, drinking and breaking down, and he has to finish it. As we learn, Thomas was officially released from the film and had been altered, and they switched out his ending with the Bigfoot scene that we got in the film, but more particularly, this is what put Thomas over the edge. He wanted to have Huey Newton Throne to be discovered in the film, but they took that away. That took away Thomas, unfortunately. As we wrap up the episode, we learn of the tragic ending of Thomas' life. In 1995, investigators found Thomas in a Impala, I mind you, which is a very black vehicle, if I may say. And we see that he died, or at least is assumed to be dead, at the same lake that he took his son Max to, while connecting that to the film. As we see the evidence on the screen of two large Goofy shoes, the classic Goofy gloves, and his body was never found. Book it here first. We better see Thomas Washington in episode 9 or 10. And more particularly, like, I wonder if Thomas worked with Mr. Chocolate, if Mr. Chocolate knew about Mr. Thomas, right, during that time. So I hope that they tie that back around. I hope that Thomas somehow makes an appearance in one of these further episodes. Ooh, that would be fantastic. But as we wrap it up, we see that they even put the "damn bitch you live here" meme in the episode, which to me was just the icing on the cake. And then we see that he ended up accomplishing his goal, making the blackest movie of all time as they play eye to eye to end the episode. Oh my goodness, man. I can't wait to talk about this on Sunday, man. This was an excellent episode of television. Probably one of my favorite episodes of TV all year, just from, and let me go back to it. Like I said, I'm not a diehard Disney fan. I watched the Goofy movie growing up, but it never really hit me like on that level. But immediately after I watched this episode, I watched the Goofy movie and just loved the parallels. And if I were to put any criticisms in this episode, and this isn't really a criticism from me, but I could just see from another person's perspective. Number one, yes, this was an episode that didn't include any of our main cast, which obviously happened in that season 3. And I know some people didn't like that, and they've done that in the past, like in FUBU episode season 2. Like, we didn't get any of the main characters, but I know some people don't like that, especially with this being the final season. So I could see that being like a con for some people, but also for those that have maybe never seen a Goofy movie, nor do they care to watch a Goofy movie, maybe this episode didn't really resonate with them, which is fine. But I will say, a criticism from my point of view, I think it was a missed opportunity to not have more in-world connections in this episode. And what I mean by that is, I would have loved going back to season 1, episode 7 band. Y'all remember those cuts, the commercials that they had within that episode when they would cut to commercial, like the cereal commercial, the Arnold Palmer, 99-cent commercial, obviously the Dodge Charger commercial. I would have loved if they would have put commercials in this episode and had like, coming, going on tour is Ricky Rock, right? Or, buy that new Yodel Kid album, or RIP to Yodel Kid, or having some other ties to like a trailer for the next Mr. Chocolate movie or the next Mr. Chocolate TV show. I would have loved if they would have had more band connections with those episodes and tying more into the world of Atlanta. That would have been pretty nice. I thought it was a missed opportunity, but outside of that, man, woo, so many layers to it, so complex. Them tackling mental health, the substance abuse, the classic nerd story, of Washington being bullied and how he viewed being bullied and how that kind of propelled him to become the man that he ended up being, the obsessive nature that he had, and just so many things that he went through, and just tying it to the real world with Hollywood agendas, black people in the workforce, black people in Hollywood, the Goofy movie and the parallels. Excellent TV, excellent episode, top 5 episodes of Atlanta of all time. You heard it here from me. So listen, we got more to talk about on Sunday. Again, the link to that stream will be in the description of this video. If you stuck around to this point of the video, put in the comments, #GoofyIsBlack. Put that in the comments for your boy and put an LOL alluding to the Goofy laugh. So thank you all for watching this long ass review. Hopefully we'll have this out pretty soon. I'm shooting this on a Friday, so maybe Friday night, Saturday. We'll see. I can't look into the future, but I'm going to hopefully have this here for you all. Thank you for the support. Again, just a friendly reminder to like the video, share the video, leave your thoughts in the comments. And again, I'll see you all on Sunday, 12 p.m. Central Time. You all are awesome. Hope you're staying safe, as you can see on the screen now. Come and join the community. Check out my other Atlanta reviews. Check out my most recent review, and we'll catch you all on the next breakdown.